G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. This is Professor Marcia Langton, shown here in her appearance in the documentary series The First Australians, made for SBS television. This year she's also delivering the Boyer lectures on ABC Radio National, and she's had a fair bit to say, and some of it I agree with and some of it I don't agree with, but this is just to give you a bit of an idea of what she's like.
Philip was under a lot of stress. His living standards were becoming worse and worse. The colony was becoming perilously close to starvation, and this must have been an incident of enormous proportions, perhaps blown out of proportion for Philip.
Okay, so that's Professor Marcia Langton, and I'll give the batteries a chance to recharge rather than run the television and the video during the day. And it's probably more appropriate to be out here for this sort of a movie anyway. Thing is, Professor Langton making the Boyer lectures where it's like carte blanche for an eminent Australian to unload for 5, I think it is, 1-hour lectures on whatever it is that they think matters. It's like a super turbocharged version of me sitting up here on the pension on an endangered species sanctuary and making YouTube movies. So Professor Langton's entitled to say whatever she thinks, and I guess I'm entitled to dispute a little tiny bit of it. The little tiny bit of what she said that I don't really agree with is where she says that there's a natural coalition between the post-1788 landholders, the farmers and the miners, and the indigenous people, and she says that their common enemy are the Greens. And from what I can make out, she speaks of issues where a mining company or a pastoral company has gone into an area where there's been some surviving remnant of the ecology, there's been some surviving remnant of Aboriginal culture, and they've spoken to the elders and they've said, look, we'd really like to, quote, develop, unquote, this area, and we'll quote, invest, unquote, a whole lot of money here, and we'll employ a whole lot of people, and it's all going to be for the good. How about you fellas sign this bit of paper? And let us do it, and we'll give you some of the money. And some people who live around there have agreed straight away. Some people have wanted to think about it. Some people have said they didn't want to do it at all. The people who didn't want to do it at all have usually been outmanoeuvred in the long run by the mining company or the pastoral company or whoever it is that wants to exploit and develop the natural resources of the surviving remnant, which is only surviving because it's so far flung from the rest of Australia where all the good stuff was. And the disgruntled, the dispossessed, the people who feel they've had a bad deal, they generally go and find somebody, anybody, who will help them raise their voices against the projects. And that often turns out to be greenies. And for some reason, the greenies, according to Professor Langton, should be automatically assumed to be in error, to be doing the wrong thing. Because she seems to feel that the greenies want to hold Aboriginals in a time capsule where they're not allowed to take part in modern Australia. And I have trouble with that idea. You know, I was raised as a white fella in a New South Wales country town, and it's unusual for somebody like me to even bother trying to get their head around the enormity of what happened when people from Europe came to Australia in boats and stole the countryside. I had some advantages over your average white Australian male. You know, I had maternal deprivation syndrome 3 times in the first 6 months. And when I was 11, I got sent off to 2 different Catholic boarding schools. So I had the taken away from the parents' experiences and the disconnection from parents' experiences early on. And I had a few other advantages over your average suburban Australian. My dad was more than twice as old as my mum when I was born. We lived most of the time up on top of the mountains, but Dad had a holiday house down the coast, so we used to pretty much live a shallow facsimile of a traditional tableland Aborigines life, where you go down to the coast in the winter and have a holiday and then come back. Only we had 3 holidays at the coast every year because we had motor cars. But I went to school with Aboriginal kids who were clean and well fed and happy and well clothed. And they disappeared from primary school, and I remember running into one of them when I was a teenager, and we were on a night train, and he looked 10 or 15 years older than me, and he was on the run from an orphanage because he'd been stuck in there. He was part of the stolen generation. And I was on my way home from boarding school because my parents were paying to have somebody raise me hundreds of miles from home. So I had a few windows into Aboriginality, and because my father was so much older than other fathers of kids my age, I got to listen to stories which brought the environmental degradation quite deeply personally home to me. When I couldn't handle living in a nurse's home at Emmaville, I rented a farmhouse, an abandoned farmhouse on a failed tin mine. And living in the remnants of the forest out there, I slowly came to understand through listening to ABC radio while looking at an open fire at night by a kerosene lamp the gap between what I'd been taught in school and what had actually happened to the Aborigines. And I decided about the time that I finished nursing that if the Aborigines were talking on the Away program about how nobody would speak to them, none of the white people would talk to them, then maybe it would be time to make a gesture, a unilateral gesture, and just say good day to every Aborigine I crossed paths with. And I tried it, and I discovered that when you're walking on the footpath in a New South Wales country town and you're approaching an Aboriginal, they spot the white person coming and they synchronise their movements so that by the time the white person's at a polite range to say good day, the Aborigines looking in the shop window, got their ear turned to them so they can't see themselves being snubbed. And it took me about 3 years before the Aborigines that I passed on the street noticed that I was saying good day to them and started to say good day back. And back before the bicentennial genocide party in 1888, I went into print in a little magazine called Rave, printed out of Woolgoolga, and I pointed out that the idea of celebrating white colonisation of Australia for 200 years was so offensive that if I thought I was an Aborigine, I'd probably be helping Michael Mansell go to Libya looking for a crate full of hand grenades and a packet of machine guns. You know, it was really getting up my nose. A few years later, when I purchased a piece of paper that says that I own 100 acres of the skin of planet Earth, and I looked at it all and found that, among other things, I was personally responsible for everything alive here, because I can choose to exploit it, try and make money out of it, or I can just pay the rates and let it live. And I also had to come up with a name to stick on the front gate. And I did what's apparently a fairly unusual thing. I went to the local land council to ask them what's the traditional name for the bit of dirt that I've just bought, the bit of paper that says I own it, even though that's like two fleas arguing over which one of them owns the dog. And they explained to me how far gone the language was around here. And I eventually found a linguist who was able to get a grant to try and sew a few surrounding languages together to have a go at regenerating that one, but that's a different story. We got talking about the 1988 bicentennial genocide party, and I mentioned a bit about the hand grenades. And the chairman of the Regional Land Council said to me at the time, he said, that's not the Aboriginal way to be throwing hand grenades, playing with machine guns to protest about that. And I asked him why it wasn't, because I was overwhelmed by the outrage at the time. Still am, actually. And he said it's a religious thing. And I didn't really understand him, so he explained that when an Aborigine thinks about the creator of the universe and sees something the Aborigine doesn't understand, what that means to the Aborigine is the creator of the universe has more going on than the Aborigine is fully aware of. There's other games going on but what one person can see. So he said the way Aborigines look at whitefellas coming to Australia is that Miami must have reasons for it. We didn't put the whitefellas here, we didn't let them go, they come in spite of us. And since they've been here, everything they've touched they've made a mess of. He said they've cut the trees down, they've fed the food plants to their livestock, they've shot out all the prey species or let their cats and foxes and dogs kill them. They've cut all the trees down, they've put the topsoil in the bottom of the ocean or filled the rivers up with it and got rid of the fish that used to live there. Back then, I wasn't aware of the idea of templates where Aborigines had maintained up to 8 separate burning regimes in any one part of the country so as to get the edge effect of having little clumps of forest with little clumps of grass with water and forest and grass forming an ever-repeating fractal template so that it was easy to predict where the game was and have good gathering as well. So I didn't realise the scale and the magnitude of the disaster. But anyway, this bloke said to me, we didn't put yous here, therefore it's not our job to remove you. If we see something we don't understand, what that means is the creator of the universe has more going on. And he said, quite honestly, based on the way you've been behaving for 200 years, if you keep on going like that for another 100 years, you're all going to be gone anyway. And the big question is whether we can hang on until the Euro-peon, techno-fascist, industrial barbarian way of living. That wasn't his way of putting it, but that's my brackets. He said, until the European way of living goes away, if we can hang on and still be able to put the country back together afterwards. He said, it's different the way white fellas, particularly Christians, see the world. He said, when a white Christian looks at something and they don't understand it, they think that must mean that God's a fucking idiot. So they pull on their army boots and grab their guns and go in there and shoot anybody that they think might look like they're doing the wrong thing. He said, we don't work like that. We don't understand why you fellas have come here, why you've made such a mess of everything, but it's not our job to get rid of you. And it seems an awful lot like, was it Aristotle, first do no harm? One of the early Greek philosophers, that was their theory. First principle of medicine, first do no harm. If you see something you really don't understand, don't make it worse by meddling with it. So, that was in 1990 maybe that he had that conversation with me. Maybe 1991. The point is, for an awful long time, I've had the idea that European civilization might just go away on Australia. Like maybe it doesn't work, maybe running sheep and cattle and cutting down the trees and mining everything and shipping the goodness of Australia overseas to somebody because they want it. They've got a market for it and they'll pay a price for it, so we should send it to them because they want it. Maybe that way of life is going to go away. And maybe the greenies, who are trying to do anything it takes to prevent any further destruction, maybe they are actually acting closer in accordance with the life force spirit of Australia than the Aborigines who want to sell out to the miners and the loggers and the farmers and the graziers so they can bust a fucking Toyota Land Cruiser every year. Maybe. I know around here I lost a lot of friends in the Aboriginal community when I published a book of poetry, and in my book of poetry I talked about a place where a block of land was purchased by the Aboriginal Land Council or for the Aboriginal Land Council, and the understanding was they were going to teach little children how to live like proper Aborigines, local Aborigines, because it was a patch of the traditional homeland. It's out to the northwest of here. Ngurrabal people on Ngurrabal land. And I'd noticed that they'd had this land for 10 years and they were working really hard and they were trying really hard, but the rules of the game said they had to run cattle on it and they had to flog the country just as hard as the neighbours were, which seemed a bit bloody ridiculous. If you're trying to live like an Aborigine, you don't run cows. You don't run sheep either, nothing hard-footed. It's bad for the country. But the bit that upset me the most, and I put it in one of the forewords to one of my poems in the book, was that they were still calling the block of land the Willows, because that was the name that was on the gate when they got the title deed. That was the name that was on the map. That was the name that was already on the letterhead that they'd had printed when they first got the place, and it was going to be too much of a disruption, a disturbance to the flow of things for them to sit down and pay attention to the fact that, as I said in my book, to call that place the Willows is tantamount to an admission of defeat, because a willow in Australia is a noxious feral pest. It's only good for making English cricket bats, and it's destroying the inland waterways of Australia. And until they changed the name of the Willows to something else, I really felt they were kind of on the wrong track. So they got a bit cranky with me, but they eventually seemed to have more or less forgiven me. But it's a bit of an interesting position being the fool on the hill, sitting on an endangered species sanctuary, feeding the kangaroos and the wallabies and the currawongs, and having the chuffs call me out to have a look at a passing koala. The currawong fights with the brown snakes and the tiger snakes to keep me safe, because I give out biscuits and free water. And after 20 years of trying to cover up the rocks with topsoil and increase the biomass and the biodiversity, because I honestly think that white colonisation has done nothing but bad for the country of Australia, and it's probably going to fail and go away. And we might all have to learn to live like traditional blackfellas, so somebody better bloody start. To have Marcia Langton say that the biggest bloody enemy that the Aborigines have is the Greens, and that the Aborigines should line up with the pastoralists and the miners so they can develop Australia. Oh dear, Prof. Is that what they call a lamington or a coconut or something, you know, like brown on the outside and white on the underside? I don't think that it's such a wonderful bloody achievement for an Aborigine to succeed in living in a brick box with a tile roof and a concrete driveway and 2 cars in the driveway and a fat double income to pay the fat mortgage, to connect to a coal-fired power station. I don't see how anybody can grow up connected to the life force, spirit, energy of the Australian continent under those circumstances. So I'm sorry, Prof, I think the tree-hugging greenies and the Aborigines who don't want development, they're the ones who are looking at life correctly. I think the Aborigines who are prepared to take whatever they can get while the going's good and put up with whatever's left afterwards, I think they're wrong. I think they're going to wind up being like the people who finally let themselves be bamboozled into signing the go-ahead for the Timbara gold mine out east of Tenterfield. Wasn't so many months after the tribal elders who signed that deal. He had a heart attack and she had a stroke and couldn't talk anymore. I knew them. I knew them. I met them and talked serious business with them. Friends of mine, I like to think. There's a fella who died of a heart attack after signing the Timbara gold mine go-ahead. He's the one who gave me part of the name of this place, Waylard Currajong Budraldoon. And I wrote 2 poems against the Timbara gold mine, and I performed one of them out the front of the Sydney Stock Exchange on the footpath all day with a 12-volt portable public address system. And the Timbara gold mine has duly been shut down because it's an environmental disaster waiting for a day to happen on. An acid heap leach gold mine in the headwaters of the Clarence River. So from my personal experience, Professor Marcia Langton, it was the tree-hugging greenies and the malcontented Aborigines, the disaffected, dispossessed, disgruntled faction of the clan who didn't want the brilliant money-making scheme to go ahead. We was in the right. And I think, Marcia Langton, you need to pull your bloody head in and take the friggin' shoes off your feet and walk around barefoot in the dirt for a bit. Because if it's good enough for me to live barefoot in the forest, then why isn't it good enough for you? Hey? You want to be a big success in the whitefellas world? Or do you want to live in Australia without making the damage any worse? Yeah? You have any idea how hard it is for a white fella to look his own society in the eye and say, well, that's not the right way to go. That's not the right thing to do. Because that's what I've had to do. And maybe, perhaps just possibly, I might be one part of 32 blackfella, so maybe I might be a surviving remnant rather than a converted white man. I don't know, but I was raised a white fella. And I chose not to go to the university. And I chose not to get on the gravy train and not to chase the fat pay packet. I trained as a nurse. And I finished up the Fool on the Hill. The white fella paying rates to feed the kangaroos and try and learn how the hell a traditional Aborigine would live in Australia, here where I live now today, because you can't live the traditional lifestyle. You've got to do something else. So I pay the rates out of the disability pension they give me for being nutty enough to tell the truth in public places. Warbles on a lot to Professor Marcia Langton. You think about it. To the rest of YouTube and my subscribers, thanks for putting up with a rant off the top of my head. I will now get along with doing my washing. There's no better way of conserving water than carrying it before you get to use it. Got to unlock it first. So, Warbles on a lot to YouTube. You have a nice day. Ciao.